Competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Players will often switch up their deck choices at least once a format, but very often they'll actually switch up their decks every single event in order to have the best matchup against the expected metagame. However, due to a variety of reasons, usually monetary restrictions, there are a large majority of players that actually cannot afford or don't have the need to switch their decks for every event or every month or even every year, which means a lot of people play their decks over and over and over again, even as they have been completely power crept out of the game, which is perfectly fine. However, there are a handful of those sort of fan bases for those decks that you really don't want to talk to or get in an argument about how good their deck is, I should say. And today, I'm going to talk about the top 5 decks that I would advise not laughing at if someone who plays that deck is nearby, simply to avoid the definite argument that's going to happen right afterwards. Now, I am not immune to this, so actually number 5 is going to be FLUFFAL's, a deck that many of you know that I love very dearly. So why do you not want to make fun of FLUFFAL's? Well, if you play against a FLUFFAL player, it is nearly impossible to make it an entire game, maybe, and let alone an entire match, without hearing them complain about Fright for Patchwork. At the time of uploading this video, Fright for Patchwork is still not in the TCG. It's obviously a very good card and boosts the consistency of FLUFFAL's a ton, but no matter what happens in the FLUFFAL matchup, they will almost always find a way to complain about Fright for Patchwork not being released. And this makes sense. We've had a ton of different sets where Fright for Patchwork could have been released, and it really does help out the deck quite a lot, and we still don't have it. But you'll see it happen if they win. They'll say, wow, that would have been way easier with Fright for Patchwork. If they lose especially, then they'll say, oh, well, I definitely would have won if I had Fright for Patchwork. And I don't deny that Fright for Patchwork is a very good card, but FLUFFAL players, and this is to myself as well, maybe just lay off on mentioning Fright for Patchwork every single match you have with a person, regardless of where it is. If it's a friendly, if it's a locals, if it's a regionals, you can hear Fright for Patchwork uttered from the lips of almost every FLUFFAL player every single match, and it's annoying. So we gotta stop. We have to be better than that. But anyway, that was number 5. Number 4 is going to be Chainburn. I'm not counting Trickstars in this category. Trickstars, while they do have sort of the burn aspect, and while they will win some games due to that burn aspect, the deck actually often wins by attacking the opponent a few times, coupled with the burn damage, where Chainburn is pretty much the epitome of a solitaire deck. It's not meant to attack the opponent hardly ever, and all it really cares about is setting up its own board, drawing some cards, and getting enough cards that you can actually burn your opponent to death. Why do you not want to laugh at a player that plays Chainburn? Well, they will spend a lot of time arguing why their deck is more skillful than yours. They will talk about things like resource management and chain links and all these things, even though it's a pretty widely accepted stereotype that Chainburn players cannot really play other decks very well. If you play Chainburn for 6 months, it's going to be very weird when you go back to playing quote-unquote normal decks that have to attack monsters and care about card advantage and all that sort of things. Yes, you learned a whole lot about chain links, but in terms of actually managing tempo and stuff, you have been completely out of the game because you only really care about what your cards do. So don't laugh at a Chainburn player because they will really want to get in an argument about how skillful their deck is. And let me just tell you, if someone has to get in a really long argument that they've probably gone through several times about how skillful their deck is, it probably means their deck is not skillful. Let's just throw that out there. Anyway, number 3 is Cyber Dragons. Now, I have ragged on this deck a few times in the past, but Cyber Dragons honestly aren't that horrible. They're probably pretty power crept out of the game at this point, but when the Cyber Dragon structure deck came out, it was actually a fairly solid rogue choice. Cyber Dragon Nova was particularly good, and you can score some free wins with Power Bond every once in a while, and that is sort of the main issue with Cyber Dragons, is that no matter what the scenario, Cyber Dragons every once in a while will score an OTK on the best of decks. Depending on how their hand looks, as long as they have like a Kaiju or a Board Wipe and Power Bond and a couple Cyber Dragons, they can usually kill you. However, and this is the huge thing, that does not happen very often. It has been a long time since Cyber Dragons have topped a regional, and I see plenty of Cyber Dragons at regionals, usually just at the lower tables, because the deck is simply not very consistent. That is a huge issue, and it's really, I mean, the best Cyber Dragon card is Cyber Dragon Infinity, and that card's not even that good in Cyber Dragons because that's sort of a control card that you slow roll your opponent down to nothing, where Cyber Dragons don't really care about card advantage too much. They simply just want to OTK their opponents. So if you talk to a Cyber Dragon player and say their deck's bad, they will likely sit down and play you as many times as they have to until they finally open that perfect hand where they can OTK you, and then they will ignore the last 4 games you beat them and say, hey, I got a game on you, you got OTK'd, my deck is quite good. And they will probably not say it as pleasantly as I just said it. They will probably use some bad words to describe how terrible your deck is because it got OTK'd by the Cyber Dragon deck that you made fun of. Although I will say that on this list, Cyber Dragon is probably one of the least bad decks on here, although I still do not recommend talking to the fans of the deck. Number 2 is one that a lot of people, if you've been following my channel, might have expected to actually show up at number 1, and that is the Dark Magician strategy. A couple months back, I made a video that I now regret, where I sort of just kind of made fun of Dark Magicians for 2 minutes, and that seemed to get a lot of people really angry. The big thing that I saw in that video, if you go to the comment section, is a whole bunch of people said I was only making fun of Dark Magicians because I'm salty because I've lost to them so many times. Now, just to clear things up, and I guess I actually don't have any proof for this, but I'm telling you, I have never in my life lost to Dark Magicians. I've played against them at regionals, I played against them online plenty of times, and almost every single time they activate the Dark Magic Circle card, look at their hand, set 4 back row, pass turn, and then I just OTK them. I will say Dark Magicians do have some pretty good cards. The new Fusion Monster is particularly fairly useful. The Trap card is actually really good if it only didn't come with the really bad self-destruction effect that blows up all your guys when it dies. But other than that, I mean, Dark Magicians aren't like totally terrible. They just sort of suffer the same issues as Cyber Dragon in that they are very inconsistent. However, I will say that the Dark Magician fanbase is much more toxic than the last 3 fan bases that I've talked about, and I don't know why. I don't know if it's like they're mad that Blue Eyes was like so much better, but just in general, Dark Magician players they so overestimate the power of the Dark Magician deck. They will tell you about how they 10-0'd every Spiral player they've played, and yet they can't do well at regionals. That's a big thing that I see when I talk about decks like these, or when you talk about decks like these, is people will say that you just gotta run it right, you just gotta build it right, you just gotta make the right plays, and then you'll be successful. And yet they never do anything at events. And then there's like the go-to excuse, well, I don't have the time to go to events. And it's like, yes, it's one thing when you can say the deck's okay, but if you're really gonna argue that the deck could be successful at events if you played in them, it's kind of ridiculous to just never go to events. I mean, it's like if I just never played basketball and said, well, I've never lost to anyone in basketball, it's sort of along the same lines, but I've probably dragged this on too much. I just don't like the Dark Magician fan base very much. Anyway, though, that is not the worst. The worst, the absolute worst, and the one that most YouTubers are scared to even mention in a video because of how bad this fan base is the Toon fans. I don't know what it is with Toons. I think it's because I mean, it's like a show deck, very similar to the Dark Magician deck, where like a main character played tunes. Maybe it's because like a handful of their cards are actually like ridiculous in any other context. I mean, Toon Table of Contents is crazy. Just a rota for any card in the deck. Toon Kingdom, when it came out, was quite good, just like in a vacuum. Mimicat is like, I mean, if you picture Mimicat and like any other archetype, the card is just like bonkers. So they have these really, really good cards stuck in a deck with not a lot of good cards, and that's kind of sad. But also, I think it same thing with the Dark Magician deck, where a whole bunch of Toon players, not only can they not agree on a build, they always think their build is the best build. If you beat another Toon player, they will be the first ones to comment, if I was that Toon player, I would not have lost. It's pretty safe to say that Toons have nowhere in the even rogue competition level of Yu-Gi-Oh! There was a time when they sort of did, when Toon Kingdom was a lot harder to actually remove from the field. But as it stands, I mean, Toon Kingdom really doesn't do anything except allow you to play your Toon cards and then protect them. But it doesn't really like gain any advantage, and that's sort of like a problem with field spells that aren't as like popular, is that they don't really do anything besides protecting your monsters. And to be completely honest, the Toon monsters themselves are not very good. It's pretty much just all a bad gimmick. And that's fine for a TV show deck, but you can't then go argue that your deck is like really good if you just play it right. Once again, if you truly think, and this is sort of the moral of the story here, if you truly think that your deck is just not being played right by the masses, go to an event, go to a regional, and prove everyone wrong. Make them realize that your deck really was good. I'd say 9 out of 10 times that I've met someone new in Yu-Gi-Oh! And they're playing one of these decks or a deck very similar where it's like really bottom of the barrel rogue and they think they have like the best deck ever. They're very humble coming out of the regional 3 and 6 or 4 and 5, and they realize that maybe they had overestimated themselves as a player or their deck as like a strategy in general, and then they can sort of move forward either switching decks or improving the deck to actually reach its highest potential. But anyway, that's going to wrap up this video. I didn't mean to dog on anyone too much. These were just some things that I noticed about the players that really feel attached to these decks. A lot of excuse making is something that's very common out of rogue players, always looking for some place to go to blame their loss on. And I get that. I'm a rogue player. At my core, I mean, that's usually what I'm playing, is something crazy. But also, I think we should look at ourselves as a community and say, sometimes you have to accept that your deck isn't the best deck, no matter how you build it, and that's okay. You don't have to make 1,000 excuses about why you lost. Just accept it and have fun with it. But that'll wrap up this video. Let me know your guys' comments. I'm sure I will see a lot of negative comments on this video, probably a huge dislike to like ratio, but we'll see. Maybe I have faith in my subscribers. It's the non-subscribers watching that scare me a little, but I will see you guys later. Bye.